The moment he falls to his knees in the middle of the office, clutching the bouquet of red roses in trembling hands, all the computers seem to fall silent simultaneously. The entire hallway turns to watch what would be for him the bravest moment of his life. But before he can finish the sentence, the woman he loves takes a step back, raises her chin, and lets out a laugh that echoes like a snap. "You? Did you really think I'd stay with someone like you?" The bouquet slips from her fingers. The ground seems to open up, and that man, invisible, underestimated, treated as a joke, stands up in a silence that no one dares to break. What no one knows is that that moment would not be the end. It would be the beginning of a transformation that would make everyone kneel before the truth they were about to witness. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. The entire office was still enveloped in that cold, air-conditioned atmosphere, with the constant clatter of keyboards creating a monotonous soundtrack when Murillo entered, carrying that enormous bouquet of red roses. It was strange to see him so well-dressed. Light blue dress shirt, new trousers, hair so carefully combed that he hardly resembled the same quiet young man who used to go unnoticed as he walked between the cubicles. He was tall, always had been tall, and this made him avoid attention, walking hunched over, as if he wanted to occupy less space than he actually could. But that day, something was different. He walked with his heart almost touching his ribs and his hands sweating inside his long sleeves. He had decided, after months of observing that smile, that sweet voice on the phone, that gentle way she treated even the most difficult clients, that he needed to say what he felt. And it wouldn't be hidden. He wouldn't be invisible anymore. It would be with an open heart. He had prepared for this for weeks, rehearsing in the mirror, repeating phrases late into the night in the bathroom of the simple apartment where he lived. Murillo took a deep breath when he spotted Julia sitting at her station typing something while fidgeting with the blonde strand of hair that always fell on the same side of her face. His heart trembled like a child about to do something wrong, but here was a man willing to face anything. He approached until the entire team realized something was happening, because no one walked all the way there carrying so many roses just to deliver a message. People began to raise their heads, whisper, and gently push their chairs aside to get a better look. When Murillo stopped in front of her, the entire floor seemed to fall silent, as if the world were waiting for the next second to breathe. He then knelt down, and the weight of that gesture made his heart beat so hard it felt like it would explode. Julia slowly raised her eyes, first surprised, then embarrassed, and gradually, very quickly, that turned into impatience. "Julia, Murillo began, his voice choked with emotion, holding the flowers as if holding his own soul. "I like you. Really. I know I might not seem like your type, but I needed to tell you." He barely finished the sentence before a light, almost mocking laugh escaped her lips. The laugh turned into a guffaw, and the guffaw echoed as others began to join in, those restrained, malicious laughs, typical of those who see the vulnerability of others as entertainment. Julia put her hand to her mouth, not to hide her emotion, but to stifle her laughter. And then she stood up, approached him, and said the phrase that would crush anyone's soul. "Murillo, for God's sake, do you really think I would be with someone like that? Look at you. I would never be with a fat man." Her words were sharp as invisible blades, and some people around them let out nervous giggles, as if this were a spectacle, and they were just the audience. Murillo felt the world spin, his face heat up, his eyes burn without him being able to control it. The air grew heavy, his mouth dry, and shame took hold like a devastating wildfire. He stood up slowly, trying to hide the trembling in his hands. He said nothing, didn't defend himself, didn't plead, He simply held the flowers tightly until the petals were almost crushed, and while everyone watched, he left the bouquet on her table, not as insistence, but as a farewell to the courage he had gathered. Then he walked to the elevator without looking back, even though he knew everyone was watching him. The door closed slowly, and when he was alone in the elevator, Murillo collapsed. But there, in the profound silence, something began to be born within him, a pain so great that it left a trail of resolve. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to prove anything to anyone. He only wanted to recover something he had lost years ago: himself. That night, upon arriving at his apartment and looking in the mirror, that mirror he had avoided for so long, Murillo saw not only the weight on his body, but the weight of everything he had carried since childhood. Insecurity, rejection, constant comparison to others' standards, the shadow of being the fat one, the exaggerated one, the different one. He cried silently, but for the first time it wasn't a cry of resignation. It was a cry that signaled the end of a cycle, and a new desire surged forth almost like a punch. I'm going to change, not for her, for me. The next day, Murillo began his journey. He made an appointment with a nutritionist, joined the gym, and woke up before sunrise. It hurt a lot. His body begged for mercy, his legs trembled, and hunger seemed to mock him. But each day he imagined a new version of himself, stronger, more confident, more whole. And nobody knew who he really was. Nobody knew that the overweight man everyone laughed at was, in fact, the heir to the company, the only son of the owner of the multinational group. He had always hidden this to work as a regular employee, learn the ropes of the company, and develop as a man before taking on any position. Now that humiliation would become fuel to transform him into someone he never imagined he could be. And while Murillo was transforming, Julia had no idea that her life was also about to be turned upside down. The entire office still echoed the scene from the first block, the fallen bouquet, the muffled laughter of his colleagues, her look full of contempt. But now, in this second block, the narrative plunges into a slow, profound, and painful transformation. Too painful to fit into a few lines, forcing each detail to unfold like a wound and a rebirth. After the public humiliation, he left the building walking as if carrying tons on his shoulders, feeling every drop of shame rust in his chest. For weeks he avoided mirrors, avoided people, avoided even the sound of his own name, as if everything about him were an exposed scar. But the real trigger came in a silent early morning, when he found his father waiting for him in the mansion's kitchen. That powerful, discreet man, owner of a gigantic multinational corporation whom no one imagined to be his father, sitting with a cup of coffee and a look that mixed concern and respect. His father didn't hug him, didn't console him, didn't say that everything will be all right. Instead, he calmly asked, "Son, do you want to continue living based on the opinion of someone who despises you?" And that question broke something inside him. It was then that he decided to change, not out of revenge, not to prove anything to her or his colleagues, but because for the first time he understood that he was living in the shadow of his own shame. In the following months, the office practically forgot about him, because the young man requested indefinite leave, disappeared from meetings, and stopped walking the hallways where he had previously been mocked behind his back. Meanwhile, hidden from the world, he immersed himself in an almost monastic routine. Carefully planned meals, exercises guided by a personal trainer hired by his father, long walks at dawn, sessions with a psychologist who helped him rebuild what the humiliation had destroyed. The first weeks were brutal: body aches, anxiety attacks, sleepless nights thinking about why. But little by little, the pain became fuel. Each month, his breathing became lighter, his steps firmer, his self-esteem less broken. And his father, always present without intruding, observed everything with the discretion of someone who knows that true growth never happens under the spotlight. When he finally returned to the company, almost 6 months later, no one recognized him. He entered the building wearing clothes that now fit him well, his posture erect, his beard neatly trimmed, his gaze confident and silent. It wasn't a flashy before and after, it was a rebirth. And of course she saw him. The young woman who had humiliated him froze in the middle of the hallway, dropping a folder full of reports when she realized that this man was the same one to whom she had spat cruel words. The transformation wasn't just physical. His gaze no longer sought acceptance, didn't try to please, didn't carry insecurity. He was, suddenly, someone impossible to ignore. Colleagues who had previously laughed now greeted him. People who had avoided him now observed him with admiration. But the most impactful thing was realizing that behind the visual impact, there was something deeper. He had begun to recognize his own worth. Meanwhile, she, once full of certainty and arrogance, began to experience the opposite: insecurity, regret, and a growing sense of loss, as she realized she had rejected someone whom many now considered admirable. The twist of fate, however, became even more intense when a serious problem struck her life, something that would shatter the image she had built and make everyone around her disappear. And it was precisely at that moment that only one person approached to offer help: him. Not out of love, not out of hope of winning her over, but out of something much rarer: the compassion of someone who had learned to see the other person beyond their mistakes. And that silent, almost moral gesture would mark the beginning of an internal conflict within her and a definitive liberation for him. Because, by extending his hand, he would realize that he no longer needed anything from her. Neither love, nor approval, nor apologies. He was free. The transformation that once seemed impossible begins to ignite like a timid flame within the heart of the millionaire, still anonymous to everyone in the office. And he starts to reorganize not only his own routine, but also every piece of pain etched into his memory after the public humiliation. From that day, when he heard disguised laughter echoing between desks, murmurs whispering his name with contempt, and the cruel phrase from the woman he loved repeated like a sentence, he decided he would never let anyone determine his worth. The gigantic company his father led, of which he was the direct heir, continued to function like a perfect organism, without anyone suspecting what really happened in the life of that seemingly ordinary employee who arrived early, avoided eye contact, and had learned to silence his own vulnerability. But now all that was changing. The heavy body that had so often served as an emotional shield became the daily reminder that it was time to rebuild his own story, not to prove anything to anyone, but to recover the respect he himself had lost in front of the mirror that painful afternoon. And inside a small gym near the condominium where he lived, he found something he never imagined he had: consistency. The first few days were brutal, full of shame, sweat, discomfort, and an almost childlike feeling of inadequacy in the face of athletic and disciplined bodies. But each step took him further away from the moment when the woman he loved laughed at his love. Each heavy breath, each trembling repetition, each short run on the treadmill was more than exercise. It was a silent struggle against the fragile version of himself that the world tried to turn into a joke. The entire office noticed the change, even before he himself accepted that he was different. His shirt started to become looser, his eyes brighter, his smile less shy. He still avoided his wife, not out of anger, but because it was almost impossible to look at her without reliving the pain of that day. She in turn began to find it strange when he stopped reacting to her presence, when he stopped blushing at the sight of her and stopped stumbling over his words when answering any simple question. It was then that, for the first time, she felt something she had never felt in relation to him: curiosity, the feeling that she had lost a control she never imagined could slip from her hands. And this curiosity turned into unease when months later he entered the company elevator with a new haircut, more tailored clothes, a more upright posture, and a serene air that contrasted violently with the man she had humiliated in front of everyone. She stood motionless, observing every detail, trying to understand how someone she had considered so small now seemed bigger than anyone else on that floor. It wasn't just appearance, it was presence, it was strength, it was respect. And while all this was happening, rumors began to surface, first timidly, then unavoidably. "Did you see how he's changed? He's unrecognizable. Wow, he's become handsome, huh?" Comments that once hurt now passed over him like a breeze, because for the first time, he knew who he was, regardless of what they said. The woman who had destroyed him with a cruel phrase found herself facing her own regret upon realizing that, amid so many empty faces, he was the only one who truly had sincere feelings. But now it was too late. Fate, however, still had a bigger twist in store, one that would bring them face to face again. But this time, not for him to seek something from her, but for her to need him in a way she never imagined. He didn't know it, but within that same office where he had been humiliated, she was about to face the worst crisis of her life, one that would expose not only her vulnerabilities, but also the truth about who was really by her side. And he would be the only one capable of seeing beyond the mask that everyone considered perfect, because unlike her, he never learned to turn his face away from someone's pain. While her transformation continued, silent and steady, the universe prepared the reunion that would show that beauty without character is a facade, and that the love he once offered, even rejected, remained alive in a way she never deserved, but was about to desperately need. The cold morning wind seemed to push the dry leaves across the nearly empty parking lot as he walked slowly with firm steps, no longer weighed down by the emotional exhaustion of before, but laden with purpose, of someone who had finally discovered who he was, not by what others said, but by what he had decided to become. When he reached the glass door, the people in the office naturally moved aside, making way as if they were facing an authority they finally recognized, even though not everyone knew exactly who he was. But this time, it wasn't the impeccable suit, nor the transformed physique, nor the confident gaze that drew attention. It was that aura of someone who had faced the hell of cruel words and come out the other side with something that no one there could take away: dignity. Across the hallway, she sat hugging her legs, her breath ragged, her eyes red from crying. The woman who had once humiliated him in front of everyone now trembled like a child who had just lost everything she believed she had control over her own life. Life had taken its toll. The relationship she was so proud of was over. The boyfriend she flaunted had traded her for another, and her career hung by a thread after an internal turmoil she couldn't manage. No one approached. No one offered help. No one even stopped to ask if she was okay. It was as if the world had decided to show her exactly what he felt that day in the middle of the office: loneliness. He took a deep breath. He saw the reflection of his former self in that fragile position she was in. It wasn't a matter of pride, nor of victory, much less of revenge. It was humanity. And when he took his first step towards her, silence filled the hallway. Some looked up, curious. Others shrank back, anticipating that perhaps he would finally return the humiliation. But what no one expected was precisely what he decided to do. He knelt, not as before, not as a gesture of supplication, but as one who empathizes with the suffering of another, as one who extends a hand without expecting anything in return. She slowly raised her gaze, surprised, her voice trembling too much to disguise anything. "You? Why you?" He simply offered his hand. "Because I know how much it hurts," she said, with a calmness that pierced the air, "and because despite everything, I don't wish anyone to go through what I went through." She held his hand as if finding a thread of hope to avoid drowning. Tears fell, not those of wounded pride, but those of someone who finally understood the magnitude of the mistake, the weight of the cruelty spoken without consequence. "I destroyed you that day," she whispered, her voice faltering. "And yet you're still here." He shook his head gently. "You didn't destroy me. You just pushed me to discover who I really was." The words landed like a silent blow. There was no anger. There was no irony. It was the naked truth of a man who had rebuilt everything others had tried to diminish. She swallowed hard, trying to formulate any kind of excuse, but realized that no phrase could erase what she had done. Time doesn't go back, but the future transforms. She murmured something he didn't expect to hear that day. "Pardon me." He smiled with a peace that startled everyone watching the scene. "I forgave you a long time ago, but that doesn't mean I'll go back to being who I was to you. I can help you get back on your feet, but I'm not going back to where I came from." She lowered her eyes, understanding. There was no room for romance there. The love she wanted back no longer existed. What did exist was something else: respect, gratitude, recognition, and he knew that was far more powerful than any unresolved story. Gently, he helped her to her feet. He led her to the company's emotional support room and asked them to take care of her. Not as someone special, but as a human being who needed help. And when she finally went inside, before the door closed, she looked at him one last time. Not with desire, not with hope, but with genuine remorse. Back in the hallway, his colleagues watched in silence. Some tried to hide their shame for having laughed at him in the past. Others murmured comments about his posture, his strength, the transformation that no one could ignore anymore. One of the managers approached, adjusting his glasses. "Sir, I think we need to talk about your new position in the company." He smiled serenely. "Sure. Now we can talk." The truth finally came to light that day. He was the true heir, next in line to the throne, the most important name in the company. But ironically, that wasn't what surprised people. What truly struck the atmosphere was the fact that such a powerful man had chosen to be humble before becoming sovereign, strong before being feared, a giant on the inside before being seen as such on the outside. And as he walked toward the meeting room, someone behind him whispered, "Isn't he handsome?" Another replied, "He always was. He just needed time to realize it." The world is full of ironies. Sometimes those who despise you today will applaud you tomorrow, but you no longer need the audience. Because true victory isn't about making someone fall in love with you. It's about finally falling in love with who you've become. And on that day, he was exactly that. Someone who triumphed without stepping on others, who grew without humiliating others, who transformed pain into purpose, and who, deep down, knew that life always rewards those who choose the right path, even if they started on the wrong one. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone you love. Click now to share it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories we're preparing with great care for you.